stumbled into the wrong car, collapsed onto the wrong shoulder, and fell asleep in the arms of the most dangerous man in the city. He had survived assassins, betrayal, and blood-soaked wars for power, but nothing, not one single thing in his calculated life, had prepared him for her. She didn't know his name. She didn't know what he was capable of. And somehow, impossibly, that made her the most terrifying person he had ever encountered. Welcome Afro-Korean Wave, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The rain came down like it had a personal grudge against the city that night. It hammered the pavement, flooded the gutters, and turned every streetlight into a smeared blur of gold and amber. Destiny Williams felt every single drop like a verdict. 12 hours. 12 hours of back-to-back trauma cases, 2 full codes, a pediatric emergency that had shaved at least 3 years off her life, and one family who had genuinely screamed at her because their elderly grandmother wasn't healing the way she'd seen on a primetime medical drama. Her feet didn't just ache. They throbbed with the kind of deep, bone-level exhaustion that sleep alone couldn't fix. She pushed through the hospital's automatic doors and immediately pulled out her phone, squinting at the screen through sheets of falling water. The rideshare app showed a black BMW, license plate ending in 4, idling 50 feet away in the pickup zone. She could barely make out the dark shape of the sedan through the downpour. She pulled her jacket over her head, said a quiet prayer for her socks, and sprinted. She yanked the door open and threw herself inside. The warmth hit her first. Then the smell. Sandalwood and something deeper underneath, something rich and quiet and entirely out of place for a rideshare vehicle. The leather seats were heated. The interior lighting was low and amber. The partition between front and back was dark-tinted glass. She registered none of it with any real concern. She was too tired. Her brain was running on fumes and caffeine and the last scrap of professionalism she hadn't spent during hour 11 of her shift. Thank God, she breathed, sinking into the seat and closing her eyes. I thought I was going to drown out there. You can just take me to Maple Street, the apartment complex on the corner. She was already digging through her bag for her earbuds. She didn't wait for a response. She never looked up. She didn't notice the man sitting perfectly still beside her until she had already buckled her seatbelt and let her head fall back against the headrest, and by then her body had made its decision entirely without her permission. The warmth of the car, the hum of the engine, the relentless drumming of rain against the roof, it conspired against every synapse she had left. Her eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. Destiny Williams fell asleep. Ji-hoon Kong had not built his empire by losing control of situations. He had survived 3 separate assassination attempts before turning 30. He had expanded his family's operations from Seoul to the American market with the kind of precision that made his rivals lose sleep. He had sat across from men who wanted him dead and made them feel grateful to be alive by the time he was done with them. He was, by every measure that mattered in his world, untouchable. And yet he was sitting perfectly still in the back of his own car, his hand frozen halfway to the weapon beneath his jacket, watching a complete stranger breathe softly against his shoulder. In the driver's seat, Min-jun had gone rigid. His eyes kept cutting to the rearview mirror with an expression that said he was waiting for a command, any command, that would make this situation make sense. Sir, he whispered, his Korean low and precise. What do you want me to do? Ji-hoon said nothing for a long moment. He studied her face. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with dark skin that seemed to glow even in the dim interior of the car. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail that had mostly survived a 12-hour shift. There were shadows under her eyes so deep they looked permanent, and a hospital ID badge was clipped to her scrubs. Registered nurse. Memorial Hospital. The name on the badge matched the face now resting against his arm with complete, unconscious trust. There was a stain on her sleeve that might have been blood. She smelled like antiseptic and cold coffee. She was not a threat. She was just a tired woman who had made a very unfortunate mistake. Drive, Ji-hoon said quietly. Min-jun blinked. Sir. Where? Around the block. Slowly. He needed time. His contact was already 14 minutes late, and Ji-hoon had been composing a particularly pointed response to that failure when this woman had materialized out of the rain like something his subconscious had invented. He watched her sleep. He watched the way her hands stayed curled around the strap of her bag even in unconsciousness, like she was used to protecting what little she had. He had seen that particular posture before. It belonged to people who worked hard because they had no other option. It did not belong to anyone sent to surveil him. It did not belong to a trap. The car moved smoothly through rain-slicked streets, and Ji-hoon silenced his phone twice as his contact called. He didn't entirely understand why he kept doing it. He told himself it was strategy, that he needed to assess whether her presence in his vehicle was coincidence or something engineered. But the truth was quieter and more uncomfortable than strategy. He was curious. He was sitting in the back of his own car, surrounded by men who answered to him and enemies who feared him, and he was genuinely, uncomfortably curious about a sleeping nurse in bloodstained scrubs who had waltzed into his world without a second thought and made herself at home. When was the last time anyone had looked at him, or in this case, not looked at him at all, and seen nothing worth being afraid of? 43 minutes passed. Minjun had circled the same 6 blocks 17 times and was beginning to visibly suffer for it. Ji-hoon's contact had stopped calling. And then she stirred. He watched it happen in stages. Her breathing changed. Her fingers tightened on her bag strap. Her eyelids fluttered twice before finally opening, and he watched consciousness return to her face slowly, then all at once, and then the specific, precise moment she realized that the shoulder she had been using as a pillow belonged to someone she had never met in her life. Oh my God. She jerked upright so fast she nearly threw herself into the partition. Her hand flew to her chest. Her eyes were wide and scanning the interior with the rapid, assessing look of someone whose brain had shifted immediately into survival mode despite the shock. And even in that moment, even with her heart clearly hammering loud enough that he could almost hear it, she was evaluating rather than screaming. He noted that. He noted it very carefully. I am so sorry, she breathed. I thought this was my Uber. I was so tired I didn't even. She stopped. She looked at the interior again, really looked at it this time. The quality of the leather, the privacy glass, the absence of a rideshare placard, the man beside her in a suit that cost more than her monthly rent. This isn't my Uber, is it? No, Ji-hoon said. It is not. Her hand moved toward the door handle. He made no move to stop her. He simply watched. And that, he could tell, confused her more than any threat would have. The car was still moving. She had no idea where she was. He watched her recognize both of those facts in real time and watched her shove the panic down with a discipline that impressed him despite himself. Who are you? She asked. Her voice was steady. It shouldn't have been, but it was. And where are we going? Ji-hoon tilted his head slightly. Those are excellent questions, he said. I've been asking myself similar ones for the past 45 minutes. He let that number land. He watched her process it. You have been asleep for quite some time. I was beginning to wonder if you plan to wake up at all. She stared at him. You let me sleep for 45 minutes. In your car. Without waking me up. She swallowed. Are you going to kill me? Because I need you to know that I genuinely don't know anything. I work at Memorial Hospital. I'm a nurse. I thought this was my ride home. I didn't see anything. I don't know anything. I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed and never think about any of this ever again. The corner of Ji-hoon's mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. If I intended to kill you, he said calmly, you would already be dead. The fact that you're still breathing should tell you something about my intentions. He reached into his jacket. She flinched. He produced a phone. Your address was Maple Street. Yes. The apartment complex on the corner. She nodded. He spoke quietly in Korean to Minjun. The car shifted direction, moving toward a part of the city she finally recognized. She exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour. You're taking me home, she said, and the disbelief in her voice was almost musical. It seems like the simplest solution to an unusual problem, Ji-hoon replied. Unless you'd prefer to be dropped somewhere else. She pressed herself against the door, maximizing the distance between them in a way that he found more amusing than offensive. She apologized twice more before they reached her building, rambling with a particular kind of exhausted sincerity that couldn't be faked. He listened to all of it. He let the car stop. He let her fumble with the handle. He let her fall out onto the wet sidewalk and stand in the rain for a bewildered second, staring back at him. Thank you, she said. I mean, for not killing me. And for the ride. And I'm sorry about your shoulder. The car window was between them now. The streetlight caught his face for the first time, and he watched her register that too, the sharp angles of it, the eyes that gave nothing away, the quality of attention he was paying her that didn't belong to any ordinary encounter. Be more careful, he said quietly. The next car you stumble into might not be so forgiving. The door closed. The BMW pulled away into the rain. And Ji-hoon Kong rode in silence for the next 20 minutes, thinking about a tired woman with steady hands and a voice that didn't shake, and wondering why he couldn't make himself stop. 3 days passed. Destiny went to work. She came home. She ate leftover rice and watched 3 episodes of a show she wasn't really watching. She did not tell Priscilla at the nurse's station, who would have called the police immediately. She did not tell her mother, who would have had her on a flight home before midnight. She did not even write it in her journal, which had heard every other secret she'd ever kept. Something about the whole thing felt too strange to put into words.
Too private. Too impossible.
The man in the black BMW existed in a category she didn't have language for, somewhere between nightmare and fever dream, and every time she started to process it, her brain quietly suggested she might be better off not trying. On the fourth day, she walked out of the hospital after another punishing shift and came to a complete stop on the sidewalk. A black BMW was idling at the curb directly in front of her.
The window rolled down.
Minjun's face appeared, carefully, professionally neutral. "Miss Williams," he said, and the fact that he knew her name sent cold moving through her in a slow, deliberate wave. "Mr. Kong would like to speak with you." "Mr. Kong," she repeated, her voice flat with the effort of staying calm. "And who exactly is Mr. Kong?" "The man whose shoulder you slept on 3 nights ago," said a voice from inside the car. And something happened in Destiny's chest that had no business happening. Something that was entirely unrelated to fear and entirely unhelpful in this particular situation.
"I promise I won't bite," Ji-hoon said. She should have walked away.
Every cell in her body that had anything to do with rational decision-making was sending that exact message. She had an actual ride coming. A silver Honda Civic. A car she had ordered herself. A car that was definitely not this one. And yet her feet would not move. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "I have a ride coming.
A real one.
One I ordered." "Cancel it," Ji-hoon said, and somehow it didn't sound like a command. It sounded like an invitation with weight behind it. "I only need a few minutes of your time. Consider it an apology for frightening you the other night."
"You didn't frighten me," Destiny said.
She heard a soft sound from inside the car that might have been a laugh. "Then provide discreet care for members of my organization. The work would be well compensated and the hours would be flexible enough to accommodate your position at the hospital." He watched her face with the same careful attention he had been giving her since she woke up in his car. "I want to be clear. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. No treating gunshot wounds and lying to law enforcement. My employees and their families need access to quality healthcare without the complications that come with traditional systems. Minor injuries, routine care, the kind of treatment that would raise questions in an emergency room but is entirely ordinary in every other context." Destiny turned the card over in her hands. She thought about her student loans. She thought about the extra shifts she picked up every month just to make rent. She thought about the 2 extra jobs she had worked all the way through nursing school and the bone-deep exhaustion that had been her constant companion for the better part of a decade. And then she thought about his eyes, and the way he had looked at her in his car, not with threat or possession but with something that looked dangerously close to recognition.
"Why me?" she asked.
"You could hire anyone. Someone with more experience in whatever world this is. Why track down the random woman who fell asleep on your shoulder?" Ji-hoon was quiet for a moment that felt longer than it was. When he spoke, something in his voice had changed quality.
"Because you weren't afraid of me," he said.
"Not really. Even after you woke up and understood the situation, you didn't panic. You asked questions. You tried to assess what was happening instead of simply reacting to it." He met her eyes, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. "Do you know how rare that is? How few people look at someone like me and see anything other than a threat to be managed or a resource to be used."
The car stopped.
Destiny looked out the window and found herself staring at her own apartment building. They had driven in a perfect circle, bringing her exactly back to where she had started. She understood the symbolism without being asked. "I need to think about it," she said. Ji-hoon nodded as though he had expected nothing else. "Take the time you need. My number is on the card." He reached across to open her door, and for a single suspended moment his face was close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, could catch the faint trace of his cologne beneath the night air. "But Destiny," he said quietly, and the sound of her name in his voice did something she was absolutely not going to examine right now.
"Don't take too long.
Opportunities like this don't stay open."
She stepped out.
She watched the BMW pull away and disappear around the corner. She stood on the wet sidewalk holding his business card with both hands, squeezing it until the edges cut into her palms. She should throw it away. She should go upstairs and add this to the list of things she was never going to think about again and sleep for 12 hours and wake up in her normal life. She knew this. She understood this completely. She went upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, turned the card over in her hands one more time, and did not sleep for a very long time. 3 days later, she called the number. Ji-hoon answered on the first ring. 2 weeks after that, she was standing outside a nondescript building in a neighborhood she had never visited before, trying to remember why she had believed this was a good idea. The instructions had been simple.
An address. A time.
A promise that everything would be explained on arrival. She had been rehearsing sensible objections for most of the drive over, but when the door opened and she stepped inside, every objection she had prepared dissolved quietly on contact with reality. Because the interior of the building looked nothing like what she had imagined.
No shadows.
No men with weapons visible in doorways. No aesthetic of organized menace. What she found instead was a clean, properly equipped medical clinic. Examination rooms with real equipment. A supply room stocked with things she actually recognized. A waiting area with chairs that didn't look like they belonged in an interrogation room. She stood in the middle of it and breathed out slowly, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Something that felt uncomfortably like relief.
Impressed.
Ji-hoon's voice came from behind her.
She turned.
He was leaning against a doorframe in a dark button-down, watching her with an expression that was close to pleased.
Surprised, she said honestly.
I was expecting something more, I don't know.
Criminal. He laughed.
The sound of it moved through the room like something that hadn't been let out in a while. This clinic serves my employees and their families, he said, moving closer with the unhurried ease of someone entirely comfortable in his own space. People who work hard and deserve care without fighting a system that was never built for them. You'll be treating sprained ankles and monitoring blood pressure and giving vaccinations. Not extracting bullets.
He paused. Mostly. Mostly, she repeated.
The other cases, he said, his voice evening out, come with the nature of my work. My organization has enemies. Enemies sometimes make their feelings known physically. When that happens, my people need someone they can trust. Someone who asks only the questions that are medically necessary. He stopped close enough that she could feel the particular kind of attention he paid her, like a change in air pressure. Can you do that, Destiny? Can you help people without needing to know every detail of how they got hurt?
She thought about it.
She didn't give him the answer she had pre-prepared. She actually thought about it, the way she thought about difficult cases, slowly and from multiple angles, not looking for the answer that felt right but for the one that was honest.
I can try, she said.
But I have conditions. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but adjacent to it.
Name them.
If someone comes in with something life-threatening, I call an ambulance. I don't care what questions it raises. I won't let someone die to protect your privacy. She held his gaze without looking away. And if I find out this clinic is being used for something that causes harm, I'm done.
No negotiation.
No second chances. I walk away and I don't look back. Ji-hoon was silent for a long, evaluating moment. Then he extended his hand.
Deal, he said.
Welcome to the team, Miss Williams.
She shook it.
She felt the warmth of his palm against hers and the particular way his fingers closed around her hand like he was making note of the contact, and she told herself very firmly that this was a business arrangement and that whatever she was feeling needed to go somewhere it couldn't interfere with her judgment. She told herself that for a long time. She almost believed it. The first month passed in motion and adjustment. She found her rhythm quickly, the way she always did when the work was clear and the need was real. She treated the ordinary cases, the earaches and the flu symptoms and the hypertension checkups and the children who needed vaccinations their parents couldn't otherwise access, and she felt something that had been missing from her hospital shifts for longer than she wanted to admit. She felt like she was actually making a difference rather than just managing a system. The other cases came less frequently than she had feared, and she handled them with the same professionalism she applied to everything else, asking only what was medically relevant and keeping her thoughts about the rest exactly where Ji-hoon had asked her to keep them. It was a compromise she had made with her conscience with her eyes open. Most days it felt like enough. What proved far more complicated than the work was everything that happened between the work. The conversations that started about clinic operations and drifted, without clear permission from either of them, into other territories. His childhood in Seoul. Her nursing school years. The books they had both read and the ones they had abandoned. The lunches they shared in his office, sitting across from each other with takeout containers spread across his desk, arguing about subjects that had nothing to do with either of their jobs. She learned that he had opinions about film scoring that were more considered than she would have predicted. He learned that she had once seriously considered becoming a marine biologist and still occasionally mourned the road not taken. The walls he kept around himself were real and they were substantial, but they had a particular texture, she discovered. They weren't designed to repel people. They were designed to keep people from getting close enough to notice that he was paying attention to them. And he was paying attention to her in a way that was becoming increasingly difficult to pretend she hadn't noticed. She told herself it was circumstance.
Proximity.
The natural warmth that developed between people who spent real time together. She told herself this even when she caught him watching her across the clinic with an expression that didn't belong in any category she had a professional name for. She told herself this even when his hand would linger on her back for half a second longer than guidance required, even when his eyes would find hers in a room full of other people and hold for a beat past what conversation demanded. She told herself a lot of things. And she was very good at her job, and very bad at this. The night everything changed started like every other Tuesday. Quiet, ordinary, the kind of evening that didn't announce itself as significant until it was already too late to prepare for what it was going to cost. Destiny was alone in the clinic, working through the last of her paperwork by the light of the desk lamp, the building settled and still around her, when the front door burst open with a force that sent it crashing back against the wall. She was on her feet before the sound had finished echoing. Minjun came through first, and Ji-hoon was half against him, one arm thrown over Minjun's shoulders, his head down, his steps wrong in a way that told her everything before she could see the blood.
But then she saw the blood. It was everywhere.
Soaked through the dark fabric of his shirt in two distinct places, tracked across the floor in a trail from the door to where they stood, smeared across Minjun's hands and forearms. Destiny's personal feelings left the building. Her training walked in and took over completely. "What happened?" she said, already moving, already pulling gloves from the dispenser on the wall, already steering them toward the examination table with the efficiency of someone who had run this sequence too many times to panic through it. "Ambush," Minjun said, his voice stripped down to its essential components. "Outside the restaurant.
They were waiting.
He took 2 hits before we could get clear." Destiny was already cutting away Ji-hoon's shirt with trauma shears, her hands steady in a way her heart was not. The wounds revealed themselves one at a time.
Shoulder. Side.
She assessed depth and trajectory with the focused speed of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at.
Both serious.
Neither immediately fatal. But the word immediately was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and the situation had a narrow window that was closing as she stood there. "I need to call an ambulance," she said, reaching for her phone. "These wounds require surgery. I can stabilize him, but I cannot operate." Ji-hoon's hand caught her wrist. His grip was stronger than it had any right to be given what he had just lost in blood volume, and she stopped.
"No hospitals," he said.
His voice was strained at the edges, but his eyes were clear, focused, aimed directly at her with an intensity that made it hard to look away even now. "They'll have people watching the ERs. If I show up, I'm dead before morning." "If you don't get surgical care, you're dead before morning anyway," Destiny said, and she did not pull her wrist back because something in the way he was holding it told her he needed the anchor.
"Ji-hoon, I am good.
"I am very good. But I am not a surgeon. I cannot close what's open in there with what I have in this room." "Then find another way." His thumb moved once across the inside of her wrist, so brief she might have imagined it.
"Please, Destiny.
"I'm trusting you." She looked at him for a long moment. At the pain he was controlling with visible effort. At the fear underneath it, and she understood now what he was afraid of.
Not death.
Death he had made peace with long before tonight. He was afraid of failing the people who depended on him. Of disappearing and leaving behind obligations he couldn't discharge and loyalty he couldn't repay.
She set her phone down.
She picked it back up. "Minjun," she said, "I need you to make a call." She gave him a name.
Dr. Patricia Chun.
63 years old. Former trauma surgeon at Mercy General, retired for 4 years, currently living 12 minutes away, and in possession of a particular debt of gratitude toward Destiny Williams that had never been formally collected. Tell her Destiny needs her. Tell her to come alone and to bring her bag. She turned back to Ji-hoon, already moving toward the supply cabinet, pulling down everything she would need to keep him stable until Patricia arrived. "And you," she said, "are going to lie still and let me work. And you are going to stay conscious no matter how much it hurts. Do you understand me?" Something that might have been a smile crossed his face despite everything.
"Understood," he said.
"You're bossy when you're worried." "I'm bossy when I'm working," she said. "Don't flatter yourself." But her hands were gentle. She made sure they were gentle. Patricia arrived in 38 minutes with her bag, her skills fully intact, and an expression of resigned exasperation that Destiny had seen before and was profoundly grateful for now. She took one look at the examination table and one look at Destiny and said, "When you asked for a favor, I assumed you meant covering a shift," before setting her bag down and starting to scrub in with movements that proved 4 years away from an operating room had not taken anything essential. "I know," Destiny said, moving to assist. "I will explain everything.
I promise.
But right now I need to save this man's life." Patricia's eyes moved from Destiny to Ji-hoon and back to Destiny with the precise assessment of someone who had spent decades reading rooms. You care about him, she said, not as a question, not as a judgment, just as an observation she was filing away for later.
Scrub in, she said. You're assisting. 3 hours.
The surgery took 3 hours, and Destiny assisted through all of it, handing instruments and monitoring readings and tracking every vital sign with a focus that was partly professional and partly something she couldn't name, some need to keep him present that went beyond clinical obligation. When it was finished, when the last suture had been placed and Ji-hoon was resting under sedation with the slow, steady breathing of someone who was going to wake up, Destiny sat down in a chair against the wall and let everything she had been holding at arm's length for 3 hours come rushing back in all at once. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs to stop them shaking. Patricia stripped off her gloves and sat beside her without being asked. The shoulder needs time and rehabilitation, she said. Full mobility should return with work.
He's lucky, Destiny.
In more ways than one. Lucky, Destiny repeated.
The word felt hollow.
You care about him, Patricia said again, and this time it had more weight behind it. I don't know what I feel, Destiny admitted, and her voice came out smaller than she intended. Everything about this is wrong. Everything about his world is dangerous and complicated, and I knew that going in. I made that choice with my eyes open.
But I didn't anticipate, she stopped.
She pressed her lips together. You didn't anticipate falling, Patricia said quietly. Destiny looked at her hands. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone whose world could get me killed and still feel like the risk is worth it.
Patricia was quiet for a moment.
When she spoke, her voice had the particular texture of someone reaching back across a long distance. I married a man like him, she said. 30 years ago. A man who came home with bruises he wouldn't explain and absences he couldn't account for, and a way of loving me that was so complete it left no room for doubt, even when everything else left room for nothing but.
She paused.
There were nights I wanted to leave. Nights I was certain I had made the worst decision of my life. But when he died in his sleep after a long and quiet retirement, I realized I wouldn't have traded one moment of any of it.
She took Destiny's hand.
You can't change who he is. You can only decide whether you're willing to love him the way he actually is. Destiny sat with that for a long time after Patricia left. She sat with it through the rest of the night and into the gray early morning, listening to Ji-hoon breathe from the chair beside his bed, and she was still sitting there when his eyes opened 3 days later. He came back to consciousness slowly, the way people did after serious sedation, in layers and stages, blinking against the light. His eyes found her before anything else, and she watched him take in the fact of her presence with something that moved through his face too quickly for her to catalog completely.
You're still here, he said.
His voice was rough with disuse. Where else would I be, she replied. He looked at her more carefully then. Something in her tone had changed and she knew he could hear it. You should have called the ambulance, he said. Taken yourself out of this. It would have been safer for you.
Probably, she agreed.
But I've never been good at the safe road. She reached out and took his hand. She felt his fingers close around hers with a grip that said more than he was ready to say out loud.
We need to talk, Ji-hoon. About what this is.
About what we've been doing for the past several weeks, because I can't keep pretending you're just my employer, and I don't think you can pretend I'm just your employee anymore either. He was quiet for a long time. His thumb moved slowly across the back of her hand. When he spoke, his voice had shed the careful control he usually wore like a second skin, and what was underneath was something raw and unguarded that she had glimpsed before in small pieces but had never seen all at once. I have spent my entire life building walls, he said. Against the people who wanted to use me. Against the enemies who wanted to destroy me. Against anyone who might see the parts of me I have worked very hard to keep hidden.
He met her eyes.
And then you walked into my car and fell asleep on my shoulder and somehow managed to get past every wall I had without even noticing they were there. His grip tightened slightly around her hand. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to love someone without putting them in danger. But I know that I want to learn. If you're willing to let me. Destiny felt the tears before she was ready for them, the accumulated weight of weeks of feeling something she had refused to name finally breaking through the surface. I'm scared, she said honestly. I'm genuinely, deeply scared of what this means and what it could cost both of us. But I'm more scared of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. She breathed him in, antiseptic and warmth and something beneath both of those things that she had no name for except his. So yes, she said quietly. I'm willing to let you try. As long as you're willing to let me in all the way.
No walls. No managed distance. All of it. He kissed her then.
Soft and unhurried, full of everything he had been keeping behind those walls, and Destiny felt something settle inside her chest with the quiet finality of a thing that had been waiting a long time to land. The months that followed had the texture of two lives learning to occupy the same space. There were mornings in Ji-hoon's penthouse apartment that tasted like ordinary happiness, music playing softly in the kitchen, coffee going cold on the counter because they had both gotten distracted, light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows at an angle that made the whole city look like it was theirs. There were long evenings in the clinic after hours when they would talk until the cleaning staff arrived and kicked them out, trading pieces of themselves the way people did when they trusted someone with the unedited version. She learned about the boy he had been before his father's grooming had made him into the man his family needed. He learned about the girl she had been, the one who had wanted to study marine biology and had chosen nursing instead because wanting beautiful things had always felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. He opened up to her by degrees, like a door that had been sealed so long the hinges had stiffened, and she waited with patience she hadn't known she possessed, and every piece of him he gave her she held carefully and without judgment. Even the pieces that were hard to hold. Especially those. She accepted the complexity of him the way Patricia had described, not by resolving it into something simpler but by expanding her own capacity to contain contradiction. He was ruthless and he was tender. He was feared by men who deserved to fear him and impossibly gentle with the people under his care. He had done things she could not excuse and built something in that clinic that she was proud to be part of. He was not a simple story. He was a real person, and loving a real person meant taking all of what they were. But the world he lived in did not pause for their becoming. The darker periods came with regularity and they came with weight. Nights when Ji-hoon returned with his eyes carrying something that hadn't been there when he left, shadows that took hours to lift and sometimes didn't lift at all before morning. She learned to recognize the signs of a bad week, the particular set of his jaw, the way his silences changed quality when he was carrying something heavy, and she learned not to push but to stay present, to make herself available without making herself a demand. Some nights that was enough. Some nights she lay awake in the dark after he had finally fallen asleep beside her and asked herself the question that Patricia had never quite answered. Not whether she was willing to love him, she had already answered that, but whether she was strong enough to stand in the space between who he was and who she needed him to be and hold her ground without losing herself. She was still working on that answer when October came back around and everything else stopped being theoretical. Ji-hoon had been pulling away for days before he told her why. She noticed before he intended her to, the way she always noticed things about him now, the small adjustments in his behavior that didn't match his baseline. She watched him retreat behind his walls with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing it his entire life, and she felt each brick with a particular sharpness because she was the one who had helped him take them down. She gave him 2 days. Then she found him standing at the window of his apartment at 11 at night, staring out at the city lights with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders carrying something invisible that looked very heavy. "Talk to me," she said, moving to stand beside him. "Whatever's happening, you don't carry it alone." That was the agreement. He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, and she recognized the specific quality of reluctance in his eyes, not the reluctance of someone who didn't want to tell her, but the reluctance of someone who desperately didn't want her to have to know. "They know about you," he said. Quiet. Measured. Like he was placing each word down carefully to control the impact. "The Yun family. They've been watching you, Destiny. They know the hospital, your apartment, your routines, the people in your life." He paused. His jaw tightened in a way she felt in her own chest. "They're going to use you to get to me. And I don't know how to stop that from happening without." He stopped. She waited. "Without becoming the thing everyone already believes I am." She turned to look at him fully. And she saw it then, what she had only glimpsed before in fragments. Ji-hoon Kong, who commanded fear across 2 continents, who sat across negotiating tables and made grown men reconsider their life choices, was standing at his own window crying. Silent tears tracking down the sharp angles of his face with the particular quality of something that had been held back for a very long time. "I have hurt people to protect what's mine," he said, his voice barely above the ambient sound of the city outside. "I've made choices that can't be undone and taken actions that I cannot defend to anyone who lives in the light. All of it in the name of survival. But this," his voice broke on the word. He gathered it back. "You are the first good thing I have had in longer than I can calculate, and I cannot figure out how to keep you safe without becoming someone you would be right to walk away from." Destiny reached up and put her hands on his face. She turned him toward her. She held him there, her thumbs moving gently across his cheeks, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him since the beginning, without flinching, without managing her reaction, without giving him anything less than the full weight of her attention. "Listen to me," she said. "You are not a monster. You are a man who has had to make impossible choices in circumstances most people never face, and some of those choices have caused real harm, and you will carry that, and you should carry that. But it does not define you. What defines you is what you choose next.
His eyes searched hers.
What do I choose next?
You fight, she said.
Not alone in the dark the way you always have. You fight with me standing next to you. We find a way through this together that doesn't cost us either one of who we are. She pressed her lips to his forehead, felt him exhale slowly against her. I didn't sign up for easy. I signed up for you. All of you. Including the parts that keep me up at night. He held her for a long time without speaking. When he finally did, his voice had the quality of a decision being made out loud, something he was working out as the words came. There's a way through this, he said slowly. A way to end it without more blood. Without becoming what they're trying to make me become. But it would mean walking away from everything I've built here. The operations, the network, the power structure, all of it. Starting somewhere they have no reach. He pulled back enough to look at her. Could you do that? Leave your life here, your work, everything you've made. She thought about the hospital. The clinic. Priscilla at the nurse's station. Her mother's voice on Sunday evenings. All of it real, all of it earned, all of it hers. She thought about what it had cost her and what it had given her back and what she would feel if she had to put it down. Then she thought about standing at that window with him and what it had felt like to see him cry. I can build a new life, she said. I've done it before. The question is whether you can actually let go. He met her eyes, and what she saw there was something she had never seen in him before. It was fragile and uncertain and entirely genuine. It was hope. For you, he said, I think I can do anything. They did not leave quietly. Quiet exits were not available to people with Ji-hoon's profile, and the Yoon family had spent enough time watching destiny to know when something was in motion. The weeks that followed were the most frightening of her life, not because of any single moment of danger but because of the sustained low-frequency fear of knowing they were being watched and not knowing when it would escalate. She varied her routes to the hospital. She memorized the faces of the people who stood too long on the corner outside her building. She carried her phone charged and her keys in her hand and her wits about her in a way that exhausted her in a completely different way than any 12-hour shift ever had. The escalation, when it came fast. She was walking to her car one evening when they took her. Two men, a van, the particular efficiency of people who had done this before and intended to do it cleanly. She had time to press the emergency contact Ji-hoon had made her save before the phone was gone. That was all she had time for. That was enough. Ji-hoon received the alert at 11:47 in the evening. What happened in the hours afterward was something she pieced together later from Minjun's careful, abbreviated account, because Ji-hoon himself would not discuss the details with her, and she had decided, after thinking about it for a long time, that she was all right with that. What she knew was this. He came for her. He came with everything he had and he left none of it behind and he found her before morning. She was shaken and bruised and exhausted past the point of language, and when he walked through the door of the warehouse where they had been holding her and she saw his face, she started crying before he had even reached her, not from fear but from the particular relief of knowing that someone had come who would not stop until they got to her. He didn't speak. He just pulled her into him and held her like she was a thing he had nearly lost and was still in the process of understanding he hadn't. She felt him shaking. She felt the barely controlled force of what he had just done still running through him like a current, and she held onto him back with both hands and let them both come down slowly together. Afterward, in the quiet of his apartment, after the medic had checked her over and Minjun had been sent home and the city outside had settled into the deep dark of early morning, Ji-hoon sat beside her on the couch and looked at his hands for a long time without saying anything. I'm done, he said finally. I mean it. Whatever I have to give up, whoever I have to negotiate with or pay off or call in, I am done building a world that puts you in rooms like that. She reached over and covered his hands with hers. I know, she said. I know you mean it. You're not scared? He asked. That I don't know who I am without all of it. I know who you are, she said simply. I've known for a while now. The question is whether you believe me. He turned his hands over and held hers. The silence between them was different from all the other silences they had shared. It was settled. It was earned. They left 3 weeks later. Not fleeing, because Ji-hoon did not flee from anything, but moving with the deliberate planned intention of people who had chosen their direction and were walking toward it. He had done what he said he would do, called in obligations and liquidated holdings and had the kinds of conversations that closed doors permanently and opened others. Destiny had handed in her notice at the hospital, had sat in Priscilla's break room and told her as much of the truth as she could, and had cried in her car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before driving away. Some doors were heavy, she had discovered. That didn't mean they weren't worth walking through. They settled somewhere coastal, somewhere with light that came through wide windows in the morning and the sound of water that made everything feel further from the city than miles alone could account for. Ji-hoon was still Ji-hoon, still precise and watchful and possessed of a stillness that the uninitiated found unsettling. But she watched him learn, slowly and with the particular effort of someone dismantling habits built over decades, how to exist without the weight of an empire on his shoulders. She watched him cook badly and improve incrementally. She watched him read for pleasure for what he told her was the first time in his adult life. She watched him sleep through the night without his phone within arm's reach, and she understood this was not a small thing. She found work at a community clinic 2 miles from their building, the kind of place that ran on donated supplies and the particular stubborn commitment of people who believed healthcare was a human right rather than a product. She was good at her job. She had always been good at her job. But here, without the churn of a major hospital system, without the constant managed scarcity of resources and time, she discovered what it felt like to do her work with her whole self rather than the fraction left over after everything else had taken its share. 6 months in, on an evening that had no particular significance on any calendar either of them kept, they were sitting on the small terrace outside their apartment watching the sun go down over the water when Ji-hoon said her name in the tone that meant he had been thinking about something for a while. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the water. His profile in the fading light was still as sharp as it had been that first night, still as unreadable to anyone who didn't know how to read him. She knew how to read him. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that whatever you say, it doesn't change anything between us. I need you to know that first." "Okay," she said carefully. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and produced something small, and when he turned to look at her his expression had stripped itself down to its bare components. No armor. No management. Just him, looking at her, with every wall between them long since gone. She said yes before he finished asking. She said it with a certainty that surprised even her, the immediate and complete knowledge of something she had been arriving at since a rainy night outside a hospital when she had climbed into the wrong car and found exactly the right place to land. They were married on a Saturday morning with Minjun as witness and Patricia as the closest thing to family either of them had present, in a ceremony that was small and entirely theirs. Ji-hoon cried, silent and unashamed, and she loved him more for it than she had thought possible at 9 o'clock that morning. She told him so. He laughed, the real laugh she had been collecting since the beginning, the one that changed everything about his face, and held her face in both his hands, and kissed her in the unhurried way of someone who understood they had time. She found out 4 months later, on a Tuesday morning, standing in their bathroom with the kind of certainty that comes before the test confirms it. She stood there for a long time with her hands pressed flat against the tile and her heart doing something complicated and enormous in her chest. Then she went into the kitchen where Ji-hoon was reading the news with his coffee going cold beside him, the way it always did when he got absorbed in something, and she stood in the doorway until he looked up. She watched him understand. She watched the realization move through his face in stages, and when it arrived fully she saw something happen in his eyes that she had never seen there before, not even on their wedding morning, not even the night he had come for her in that warehouse. Something that was beyond love, beyond relief, beyond any single word she had for it. He stood up. He crossed the room. He held her like the whole world was in his arms, because she was, because they were all three of them now, and outside the window the light was coming in off the water and the morning was entirely, impossibly ordinary, and she thought standing there, that ordinary had been the most beautiful thing she had ever been given. She had not found it by taking the safe road. She had found it by stumbling into the wrong car on a rainy night and having the courage to stay.